Jordan Peterson says your childhood is still controlling your life today. Every relationship you fail at, every goal you abandon, every self-destructive pattern you repeat, it all traces back to psychological wounds formed before age 7, the shocking part. Most people have no idea this is happening. Dr. Jordan Peterson, clinical psychologist and professor emeritus at the University of Toronto, has spent over 3 decades studying human development, trauma psychology, and the long-term effects of childhood experiences. What he discovered will fundamentally change how you understand your own behavior and choices. You see, most people believe they're making conscious, rational decisions as adults. They think their struggles with relationships, career, self-esteem, and life satisfaction are just random challenges or personal weaknesses. But Peterson's research reveals a much more disturbing truth. Your childhood didn't just influence you. It programmed you. Like a computer receiving its operating system, your young brain absorbed patterns, beliefs, and emotional responses that now run automatically in the background of your adult life. These programs are so deeply embedded that you mistake them for your authentic personality, the most tragic part. Many of these childhood programs are designed for survival in environments that no longer exist. You're still running defensive strategies, developed to handle a difficult parent, an unstable home, or childhood trauma. These strategies may have protected you then, but they're sabotaging you now. Today, I'm going to share Peterson's most profound insights about how childhood experiences create adult dysfunction and, more importantly, his evidence-based strategies for identifying and healing these deep psychological wounds. Are you ready to discover how your past is controlling your present and learn how to finally break free? The neuroscience of childhood programming. Before we explore specific ways childhood damages adult life, you need to understand the biological mechanisms that make children so vulnerable to long-term psychological programming, the critical period. Phenomenon Petter's research draws heavily on neuroscience findings about critical periods in brain development. During the first 7 years of life, your brain is in a state of extraordinary plasticity. It's literally sculpting itself based on environmental input. Dr. Bruce Perry's research at the Child Trauma Academy found that a child's brain forms 700 to 1,000 new neural connections every second during this critical period. But here's the crucial part. The brain doesn't just absorb positive experiences. It's equally shaped by negative ones. Stress response programming. If a child experiences chronic stress from abuse, neglect, conflict, or instability, their developing nervous system adapts by becoming hypervigilant. The amygdala fear center becomes overactive, while the prefrontal cortex reasoning center becomes underdeveloped. Attachment pattern formation. How caregivers respond to a child's needs literally wires the brain's capacity for relationships. Inconsistent, neglectful, or harmful responses create attachment patterns that persist into adulthood. Emotional regulation blueprints. Children learn emotional regulation by watching and internalizing their caregivers' emotional patterns. If parents are emotionally dysregulated, children's brains develop poor emotional control systems, self-worth programming. The messages children receive about their value, capability, and lovability become embedded as core beliefs that shape every future relationship and opportunity. Peterson emphasizes that these neurological changes aren't just psychological, they're structural. Brain scans show measurable differences in adults who experience different types of childhood environments. The unconscious inheritance. What makes childhood programming so insidious is that it operates below conscious awareness, Peterson calls this unconscious inheritance. You inherit psychological patterns from your childhood without realizing it. Implicit memory systems. Traumatic or significant childhood experiences are stored in implicit memory. Bodily sensations, emotional reactions, and behavioral patterns that trigger automatically without conscious recall. Procedural learning. Children learn how relationships work, how conflict should be handled, how emotions should be expressed or suppressed, and how to navigate the world through observation and experience. These become automatic procedures that adults follow without thinking. Identity formation, your sense of who you are, what you're capable of, and what you deserve was largely formed through childhood interactions. This identity feels natural and true even when it's based on distorted or harmful programming. The result is that adults often find themselves in situations that feel familiar but destructive, recreating childhood dynamics without understanding. Why? The 7 childhood wounds that destroy adult life. Through his clinical practice, Peterson identified 7 primary types of childhood wounds that create the most devastating adult dysfunction. Understanding these patterns is the first step toward healing them. Wound number 1. The abandonment wound. Children who experience abandonment, physical or emotional, develop what Peterson calls abandonment schemas that dominate their adult relationships. Physical abandonment, death of a parent, divorce, being given up for adoption, or extended separations create deep fears of being left alone. Emotional abandonment, parents who are physically present but emotionally unavailable, distracted, or disconnected, create equally devastating wounds. Adult manifestations, clinging behavior in relationships, desperate to prevent abandonment, pushing people away before they can leave. First, self-abandonment, choosing unavailable partners who confirm abandonment fears, inability to be alone without anxiety or depression, sabotaging relationships when they become too intimate, chronic feelings of emptiness and loneliness even when surrounded by people. Peterson observed that people with abandonment wounds often create the very situation they fear most. Their desperate clinging or preemptive rejection drives partners away, confirming their belief that they're unlovable and destined to be alone. Wound number 2. The rejection wound. Children who face chronic criticism, disapproval, or conditional love develop rejection schemas that make authentic relationships impossible. Sources of rejection, parents who only show love when the child meets specific standards, constant criticism about appearance, performance, or behavior, comparison to siblings or other children, making the child feel like a burden or disappointmental manifestations, people-pleasing behavior to avoid rejection, inability to express authentic thoughts, feelings, or needs, perfectionism driven by fear of disapproval, choosing relationships where they feel less than to avoid rejection from equals, difficulty receiving compliments or positive feedback, self-rejection before others can reject them. People with rejection wounds often become chameleons, constantly adapting their personality to what they think others want. They lose touch with their authentic self because showing who they really are feels too dangerous. Wound number 3. The betrayal wound. Children who experience betrayal by trusted caregivers develop profound trust issues that poison all future relationships. Forms of betrayal: physical, sexual, or emotional abuse by parents or trusted adults, parents who break promises consistently, caregivers who use the child's vulnerabilities against them, adults who fail to protect the child from harm. Adult manifestations: inability to trust others, even when they prove trustworthy, hypervigilance in relationships, constantly scanning for signs of betrayal, difficulty with intimacy because intimacy requires vulnerability, becoming the betrayer first to avoid being betrayed, testing relationships to see if people will betray them, isolation to avoid the possibility of betrayal. Peterson found that betrayal wounds are among the most difficult to heal because they involve the people who were supposed to provide safety and protection. Wound number 4. The shame wound. Children who are made to feel fundamentally flawed, bad, or wrong develop toxic shame that becomes their core identity. Sources of shame: being told they're bad, stupid, or worthless, being blamed for family problems or adult difficulties, experiencing abuse and internalizing that they deserved it, having natural childhood needs or emotions treated as wrong or burdensome. Manifestations: chronic feelings of being fundamentally flawed or defective, difficulty accepting love because they don't believe they deserve it, self-sabotaging behavior to confirm shame beliefs, addiction or other destructive behaviors to numb Shame and ability to set boundaries because they feel they don't deserve respect over achievement to try to prove their worth. Shame wounds are particularly destructive because shame attacks the core self rather than specific behaviors. A child who feels guilty about breaking a rule can change their behavior, but a child who feels ashamed believes they are the problem. Wound number 5. The helplessness wound children who experience situations where they have no control or agency develop. Learned helplessness that persists into adulthood. Sources of helplessness: unpredictable or chaotic home environments, having no voice in family decisions that affect them, being unable to protect themselves or others from harm, experiencing trauma with no adult support or intervention. Adult manifestations: difficulty making decisions or taking initiative, feeling like a victim of circumstances rather than an agent of change, staying in harmful situations because change feels impossible, dependence on others to solve problems or make choices, depression and anxiety from feeling powerless. Avoiding challenges because they expect to fail. Peterson noted that helplessness wounds are often reinforced by well-meaning adults who solve all the child's problems instead of teaching them how to handle difficulties themselves. Wound number 6. The responsibility wound children who are forced to take on adult responsibilities develop either over-responsibility or under-responsibility patterns that damage adult relationships. Over-responsibility sources: being parentified, forced to care for siblings or emotionally support parents, having to manage family crises or problems, being the good child who keeps the family together. Under responsibility sources: having everything done for them without learning life skills, never experiencing natural consequences for their actions, being rescued from every difficulty or failure. Adult manifestations: over-responsible, inability to receive help or support from others, feeling responsible for everyone else's emotions and problems, burnout from taking on too much, resentment toward people they feel obligated to care for, difficulty saying no to requests for help. Adult manifestations: under responsible, expecting others to handle life's challenges for them, difficulty with basic adult tasks and decisions, feeling entitled to care without reciprocating, avoiding commitments that require sustained effort, blaming others when things go wrong. Wound number 7. The worth wound children who receive conditional love or whose worth is tied to performance develop unstable self-esteem that depends entirely on external validation. Sources of worth wounds: love that depends on achievements, behavior, or meeting expectations, comparing the child unfavorably to others, withholding affection as punishment, making the child earn love through performance. Adult manifestations: self-worth that fluctuates based on external success or approval, workaholic tendencies to prove their value, inability to rest or relax without feeling guilty, fear of failure because it threatens their entire identity, difficulty enjoying achievements because they're never enough, choosing relationships with people who withhold approval. Pattern observed that worth wounds create adults who are simultaneously high-achieving and deeply insecure, never able to enjoy their success because it never feels sufficient to prove their value. The repetition compulsion: why we recreate childhood pain. Known of Peterson's most disturbing discoveries is what psychologists call repetition compulsion, the unconscious tendency to recreate familiar patterns, even when they're painful or destructive. The familiarity principle: your brain is wired to seek familiarity because familiar situations feel safer than unknown ones, even when the familiar situation is actually harmful. This is why people often find themselves in relationships or situations that mirror their childhood dysfunction. Relationship patterns: people with critical parents often choose critical partners. Those with absent fathers may be attracted to emotionally unavailable men. Children of alcoholics frequently marry addicts. Career patterns: people may unconsciously choose work environments that replicate family dynamics, authoritarian bosses who remind them of controlling parents, chaotic workplaces that feel like unstable homes. Self-treatment patterns: how your parents treated you becomes how you treat yourself. If they were critical, you develop harsh inner voices. If they were neglectful, you neglect your own needs. The trauma bond. Peterson explains that traumatic childhood experiences create particularly strong neural pathways because trauma involves intense emotion, which strengthens memory formation. These traumatic patterns become familiar even though they're harmful. Stockholm Syndrome. In childhood, children may develop loyalty to harmful caregivers as a survival mechanism. This loyalty persists into adulthood, making it difficult to recognize or leave similar harmful relationships. Learned tolerance for mistreatment. Children who experience abuse or neglect learn to tolerate unacceptable behavior. As adults, they may not recognize when they're being mistreated or may feel they deserve poor treatment. Comfort in chaos. Children who grow up in chaotic environments may feel anxious and stable. Peaceful situations because chaos feels normal to them. The unconscious attempt at mastery. Freud observed that people often recreate traumatic situations in an unconscious attempt to master them, to get a different outcome this time. But without conscious awareness, these attempts usually fail. The fantasy of changing others. People may choose partners similar to their problematic parents, unconsciously hoping to fix them and finally receive the love they needed as children. Proving worth. Those with worth wounds may put themselves in situations where they have to prove their value, hoping this time they'll be enough. Seeking control. People with helplessness wounds may create situations where they can exercise control, but often in destructive ways. Peterson emphasizes that these patterns persist because they operate below conscious awareness. People don't realize they're choosing familiar dysfunction over healthy alternatives. Peterson's childhood wound healing system. After identifying these destructive patterns, Peterson developed a comprehensive system for healing childhood wounds and breaking repetition compulsions. His approach combines elements of cognitive behavioral therapy, psychodynamic therapy, and trauma-informed treatment. Phase 1. Recognition and awareness. The first step in healing is developing conscious awareness of your childhood programming and how it's affecting your adult life. Family system analysis. Examine your family of origin objectively. What were the spoken and unspoken rules? How did people handle conflict, emotions, and stress? What messages did you receive about yourself and your worth? Pattern identification. Look for repetitive patterns in your relationships, career, and self-treatment. Do you keep choosing similar types of partners? Do you recreate familiar workplace dynamics? How do you talk to yourself? Trigger mapping. Identify situations that trigger disproportionate emotional reactions. These triggers often point to childhood wounds. If criticism devastates you, you likely have a rejection wound. If abandonment terrifies you, you have an abandonment wound. Body awareness. Childhood trauma is stored in the body as well as the mind. Notice physical sensations, tension patterns, and somatic reactions that may be connected to past experiences. Phase 2. Challenging childhood beliefs. Since you recognize your patterns, you need to consciously challenge the beliefs and assumptions formed in childhood. Belief examination. Question the core beliefs about yourself, others, and the world that were formed in childhood. Are these beliefs actually true, or were they adaptations to a specific family system? Evidence gathering. Look for evidence that contradicts your childhood programming. If you believe you're unlovable, identify people who have loved you. If you believe you're incompetent, list your achievements and capabilities. Perspective taking. Consider how you would view your childhood experiences if they happened to someone else. Often, people are much more compassionate toward others than themselves. Alternative narratives. Develop news stories about your childhood that acknowledge the harm without making you permanently damaged. You were a child doing your best to survive in difficult circumstances. Phase 3. Reparenting yourself. Peterson advocates for reparenting, consciously providing yourself with the care, support, and guidance you needed but didn't receive as a child. Internal nurturing parent. Develop an internal voice that speaks to you with kindness, encouragement, and unconditional love. This voice should comfort you during difficulties and celebrate your successes. Internal wise parent, create an internal advisor that provides guidance based on wisdom rather than fear. This voice helps you make decisions based on your adult understanding rather than childhood survival strategies. Meeting your own needs, learn to identify and meet your emotional needs rather than expecting others to fill the gaps from childhood. This includes needs for validation, comfort, security, and belonging, setting internal boundaries. Develop boundaries with your own self-critical voices and self-destructive impulses. You don't have to believe every thought or follow every emotional impulse. Phase 4, grieving and integration. Healing childhood wounds requires grieving what you lost and integrating these experiences into a coherent life story. Grief work. Allow yourself to feel and express grief for the childhood you didn't have, the love you didn't receive, and the harm you experienced. This grief is necessary for healing. Anger processing. Many people with childhood wounds suppress their anger about how they were treated. This anger needs to be acknowledged and processed safely. Forgiveness when appropriate. Forgiveness is not required for healing, but when it occurs naturally, it can be liberating. Forgiveness doesn't mean accepting harmful behavior or reconciling with harmful people. Integration. Develop a coherent narrative about your life that includes both the harm and the healing. You're not defined by your childhood wounds, but they're part of your story. Phase 5, creating new patterns. Final phase involves consciously creating new patterns based on adult wisdom rather than childhood programming. Relationship skills. Learn healthy relationship skills that you may not have learned in childhood. Communication, boundary setting, conflict resolution, and emotional intimacy. Decision-making. Develop decision-making processes based on adult values and goals rather than childhood survival strategies. Emotional regulation. Learn healthy ways to manage emotions, stress, and conflict that serve you as an adult. Self-care systems. Create self-care routines that address your physical, emotional, and spiritual needs. Breaking the intergenerational cycle. One of Peterson's most important insights is that childhood wounds don't just affect the individual. They're often passed down through generations. Breaking these cycles is crucial for your own healing and for preventing harm to others. Understanding generational trauma. Family legacy. Many dysfunctional patterns are passed down through families for generations. Parents often repeat the parenting they received, perpetuating cycles of harm. Unconscious transmission. Parents unconsciously transmit their unhealed wounds to their children through their emotional reactions, relationship patterns, and coping mechanisms. Cultural trauma. Some wounds are embedded in cultural or historical trauma that affects entire communities across generations. Becoming a cycle breaker. Conscious parenting. If you have children, use your healing work to parent differently than you were parented. Provide the love, stability, and respect you needed. Relationship transformation. Model healthy relationships for others around you. Your healing affects not just you, but everyone in your sphere of influence. Professional development. Use your understanding of childhood wounds to be more effective in your career, especially if you work with people. Community healing. Contribute to healing your community by supporting others who are working to heal their own childhood wounds. Case studies. Transformation through healing. Let me share 3 detailed examples of how Peterson's childhood wound healing system transforms lives. Case study 1. Sarah, healing the abandonment wound. Sarah was a 35-year-old marketing executive whose father left when she was 6 and whose mother was emotionally distant. She had a pattern of intense, short-lived relationships where she either clung desperately or pushed partners away. Recognition phase. Sarah identified her abandonment wound through therapy and recognized how it affected her relationships. She saw the pattern of choosing unavailable partners who couldn't abandon her because they were never fully present. Challenge phase. Sarah challenged her belief that she was unlovable and destined to be alone. She examined evidence of people who cared about her and questioned whether her childhood experiences defined her worth. Reparenting phase, Sarah learned to comfort herself during loneliness and developed internal security rather than seeking it entirely from others. She created routines and practices that helped her feel stable and cared for. Grief phase, Sarah grieved the father who left and the mother who couldn't provide emotional connection. She felt anger about the impact on her adult life and eventually found some peace with her history, new patterns. Sarah learned to choose partners based on their capacity for healthy relationship rather than their familiarity. She developed communication skills and emotional regulation that supported lasting intimacy. Result: after 2 years of work, Sarah entered a stable, loving relationship with someone who was emotionally available. She was able to tolerate the vulnerability of love without pushing her partner away or clinging desperately. Case Study 2. Michael. Healing the shame wound. Michael was a 42-year-old attorney whose childhood involved constant criticism from perfectionistic parents. Despite external success, he struggled with feelings of inadequacy and self-destructive behaviors, including workaholism and alcohol abuse. Recognition phase. Michael identified his shame wound and recognized how his overachievement was an attempt to prove his worth rather than pursue genuine interests or values. Challenge phase. Michael questioned whether he was actually fundamentally flawed or whether he had internalized his parents' anxieties and impossibly high standards. Reparenting phase. Michael developed self-compassion and learned to speak to himself with kindness rather than constant criticism. He practiced self-acceptance for his humanity and imperfections. Grief phase. Michael grieved the childhood where nothing was ever good enough and felt anger about the impact on his self-esteem and life choices. New patterns. Michael learned to pursue goals based on genuine interest and values rather than just proving his worth. He developed healthier work boundaries and addressed his alcohol use. Result: Michael reduced his work hours, pursued hobbies he genuinely enjoyed, and developed authentic friendships. His relationship with his wife improved dramatically when he stopped being so critical of both himself and her. Case Study 3. Jennifer. Healing the responsibility wound. Jennifer was a 38-year-old nurse who was parentified as a child, forced to care for younger siblings and emotionally support her depressed mother. As an adult, she was constantly overwhelmed by taking on everyone else's problems. Recognition phase. Jennifer recognized her over-responsibility pattern and how it stemmed from childhood survival strategies. She saw how she attracted people who needed rescuing. Challenge phase. Jennifer questioned her belief that she was responsible for everyone else's emotions and problems. She examined whether her helping was actually helpful or enabling. Reparenting phase. Jennifer learned to set boundaries and say no to requests for help when they depleted her own resources. She practiced receiving care from others rather than always being the caregiver. Grief phase. Jennifer grieved the childhood where she had to be the adult and felt anger about having her own needs ignored or minimized. New patterns. Jennifer developed reciprocal relationships where she could both give and receive support. She learned to help others in ways that empowered them rather than creating dependence. Result: Jennifer's relationships improved dramatically as she attracted people who were capable of caring for themselves and others. She found much more energy and satisfaction in her personal and professional life. The neuroplasticity of healing. One of the most hopeful aspects of Peterson's approach is that it's grounded in neuroscience research showing that the brain can change throughout life. Adult brain plasticity. Neuroplasticity research studies show that the adult brain can form new neural pathways and weaken old ones through consistent practice and new experiences. Therapy-induced changes. Brain imaging studies of people in therapy show measurable changes in brain structure and function, particularly in areas related to emotional regulation and self-awareness. Mindfulness and meditation. Practices like mindfulness meditation have been shown to strengthen the prefrontal cortex and reduce amygdala reactivity, helping heal trauma responses. Relationship healing. Healthy relationships can literally rewire the brain's attachment systems, helping heal childhood attachment wounds. The healing timeline immediate changes. Some changes in awareness and behavior can happen quickly within weeks of beginning healing work. Neural pathway changes, significant changes in automatic thoughts and emotional reactions typically take 3 to 6 months of consistent work. Deep pattern changes, healing core childhood wounds and changing fundamental relationship patterns usually takes 1 to 3 years of dedicated work. Integration and mastery, fully integrating new patterns and helping others heal typically takes several years but creates lasting transformation. Peterson emphasizes that healing is not linear. There are setbacks, plateaus, and breakthroughs throughout the process. Conclusion: breaking free from your past, your childhood experiences shaped you, but they don't have to define you forever. Peterson's research proves that with awareness, dedication, and proper support, you can heal even the deepest wounds and create the life you truly want. The most important insight from Peterson's work is that you're not broken. You adapted to survive in the environment you were given. Those adaptations may no longer serve you, but they demonstrate your resilience and survival instincts. Healing childhood wounds isn't about blaming your parents or remaining stuck in victim identity. It's about taking responsibility for your healing so you can live as the person you were meant to be rather than just a product of your early programming. The work isn't easy, but it's the most important work you can do. When you heal your childhood wounds, you don't just change your own life, you break the cycle for future generations and model healing for everyone around you. Your past may have programmed you, but your future is still yours to write. The question is, will you remain trapped by childhood programming, or will you do the work to break free and become who you're truly meant to be? The choice is yours, but the tools for healing are available. Peterson's system works, but only if you have the courage to face your past and the commitment to create a different future. Your healing journey can start today. What childhood wound will you begin to heal first?